As the clock struck midnight, the only sound that broke the silence of the lonely highway was the hum of the engine in Jake's old sedan. He'd been driving for hours, a restless soul escaped from mundane routine, chasing the thrill of adventure. The stars shone brightly, but the road ahead twisted into darkness, with endless stretches of nothingness closing in around him. The gas gauge flickered ominously, a reminder that he was running low on fuel. Looking for a place to refuel, he squinted into the darkness, his thoughts haunted by the stories of desolate roads that hid secrets away from prying eyes. Then, in the distance, he spotted a flickering neon sign, its lights buzzing and sputtering like faulty memories. The sign read, "Midnight Gas and Grub, open 24 hours." The place looked ancient, a relic from another time, but any sense of unease was quickly overshadowed by his mounting need to fill up. With a sigh of relief, Jake pulled into the gravel lot, his tires crunching against the loose stones. He stepped out, greeted by an enveloping silence. The air felt thick, almost viscous, as though it carried the secrets of countless travelers who had passed through this forsaken place. The gas station itself was dimly lit, the flickering bulbs casting eerie shadows against the cracked walls. A faint scent of diesel and something rotten lingered in the air, making him wrinkle his nose as he approached the pump. "Hello?" Jake called out, half expecting someone to come to assist him. A few moments passed, heavy with anticipation. Finally, he heard a soft shuffling sound from inside the station, followed by the creaking of the door. Out walked an older man, his skin weathered and pale as if he hadn't seen the sun in decades. His shirt was stained and hung loosely on his frail frame, and a crooked smile creased his face. "Welcome. You're a bit far from home, aren't you?" the man asked, his voice raspy and thick. The way he looked at Jake felt wrong, as if he were appraising a piece of meat rather than a customer. "Just passing through. I need gas," Jake replied, attempting to keep his tone neutral as he fished out his wallet. "And maybe a snack." Of course. The man nodded enthusiastically, turning to gesture toward the door behind him. "Come inside. It's warm in there, and I have just what you need." Jake hesitated for a moment, glancing back toward his car. The night felt too quiet, too still, but his stomach growled in protest. With a reluctant nod, he followed the man into the small convenience store. Inside, shelves lined with dusty snacks and faded merchandise created a claustrophobic atmosphere, the only light coming from overhead bulbs that buzzed incessantly. "Take a look around," the man said, his voice an unsettling mix of cheer and menace. I keep the best stuff here for folks like you." Jake walked through the aisles, his fingers brushing against the wrappers of outdated candy bars and stale chips. He grabbed a bottle of water and some kind of protein bar, keeping his eyes on the attendant, who watched him intently from behind the counter. The man's gaze felt like a cold hand on the back of his neck. "Do you have a bathroom?" Jake finally asked, feeling uncomfortable under the older man's scrutiny. "Out back. Just be careful of the shadows," the attendant replied, his smile widening. "They can be unpredictable at night." Right." Unsettled, Jake paid for the snacks and made his way outside. He didn't understand why he felt so uneasy. After all, it was just a gas station. But the way the shadows danced in the flickering light made his skin crawl. The bathroom was a small wooden shed, the smell of mildew overwhelming as he opened the door. He quickly finished, and just as he stepped out, he heard the quiet whisper of the wind. But it was different, more like a voice beckoning him deeper into the night. "Jake." The wind seemed to call his name, sending a shiver down his spine. Ignoring it, he turned to head back to the gas station, when something caught his eye. A dark figure standing just beyond the tree line. Heart racing, he squinted into the darkness. The figure was tall and thin, with limbs that twisted unnaturally in the shadows. Just as he was about to call out, the figure stepped forward, revealing a gaunt face with hollow eyes that seemed to swallow the light. Fear coursed through him as Jake backed away slowly, instinct telling him to run. But before he could make a move, the attendant appeared at the door of the gas station, a knowing look painting his features. "Everything all right, friend?" he asked, that same unsettling smile plastered on his lips. Yeah. Just saw something strange in the trees," Jake stammered, trying to seem casual as he moved toward the safety of the station. Don't worry about them. They only come out when the moon is high above. Just a few lost souls wandering, hungry for attention," the attendant said, chuckling softly as if it were a joke. Jake didn't laugh. "Right," he muttered, glancing back towards the tree line. The figure was gone. "I think I'll just fill my tank and get going." "Of course. I'll take care of that for you," the attendant replied, his enthusiasm unnervingly cheerful. Jake grabbed his keys, but just as he was about to head to his car, something pulled at his gut, a sudden urge to ask about the place. What's your name?" Jake asked, trying to maintain his composure. "Name's Bill," the man said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Been here a long time. Seen things, you know. Folks come and go, but they always leave something behind." Frowning, Jake brushed off the comment. Just let me fill up and I'll be on my way." Bill nodded, happily leading him to the gas pump. As the gas flowed, Jake felt a creeping sense of dread wash over him. The night seemed to stretch around him, thicker than before. With each drop of fuel, he felt as if he were being drawn deeper into some unseen trap. "Yup, there we go." Bill's voice cut through the silence as he filled the tank with a glint of something darker lurking behind his eyes. "You should stay longer next time. We don't get too many visitors." Jake nodded absent-mindedly, suddenly feeling trapped. "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind," he said, forcing a smile as he opened his wallet to pay. Just then, the flickering neon lights overhead began to stutter again, casting the parking lot into sudden bursts of shadow and light. Jake felt his heart race as the shadows seemed to flicker into unusual shapes, shifting like dark entities eager to leap into the light. "Focus on the gas, buddy," Bill said, but his voice had changed, a strain seeping through. "You wouldn't want to upset them." "What do you mean?" Jake replied, feeling the air around him grow thick with tension. "They're always hungry," Bill said, his smile turning into a grimace that revealed too many teeth. It was no longer a comfortable interaction. The atmosphere warped, oppressive and closing in. Jake stood frozen as Bill's words sank into him. He could feel something lurking just out of sight. With forceful resolve, he finished paying and stepped back, glancing around for any signs of danger. "I really should get going," he said, moving towards his car, his instincts screaming at him to leave. "Are you sure?" Bill laughed, but it was a hollow sound devoid of warmth. "The night isn't through with you yet." Ignoring the man, Jake hurried back to his car. As he climbed inside, he locked the doors and fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, but just as he was about to shift into gear, he caught sight of the shadows on the ground. Dark shapes creeping closer, blending with the surroundings as if they were alive. Panicking, he slammed the car into reverse and floored it, the tires spinning before finally gaining traction. He sped down the dark road, heart racing as he glanced into the rearview mirror. Bill stood by the gas station waving goodbye, but his smile, the predatory grin stretched across his face, was the last thing Jake would ever see of that wretched place. As he sped away, leaving the station behind him, Jake felt the shadows following. They danced on the edge of his vision, whispering promises of despair that tugged at his sanity. He felt as if he had escaped something, but a nagging thought formed in his mind. He had unknowingly entered a realm beyond the ordinary, a world where the night thrived and hungered. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that night haunted Jake. He could never shake off the feeling of being watched, the shadows whispering to him in darkness. When he recounted the tale to friends, they would only laugh, dismissing his fears as stress-fueled fantasies. But late at night, when he found himself alone, the shadows always returned, Every flicker of light, every whisper of wind became a reminder of the dark figures lurking just beyond sight. Jake now sought to drive only during daylight, avoiding the lonely roads altogether, terrified of what lay waiting for him in the depths of the night beyond the glow of streetlights. But even with daylight, he could feel them, shadows watching, waiting for the hour to turn midnight once more, and deep down he knew they would beckon him to return. It was one of those nights where the moon hung low and pale, casting eerie shadows across the landscape. The highway stretched endlessly, a black ribbon through an uninhabited part of the county. Driving alone in the dead of night, Sarah felt the weight of solitude heavy upon her. Her trusty car hummed steadily, yet the fuel gauge crept menacingly close to empty. The thought sent a chill down her spine as the realization struck. She hadn't seen another vehicle in over an hour. As the last rays of sunset faded into the distance behind her, she was left with nothing but the oppressive darkness ahead. Sarah's fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly as she scanned the roadside for any signs of life or civilization. Then, just as hope began to fade, a flickering light caught her eye in the distance. The faded neon sign read, "Hallows End Station, open 24 hours." An unnatural chill creeping up her spine was quickly overshadowed by the relief of having found a place to refuel. Pulling into the gravel lot felt oddly surreal. The gas station was old, its paint peeling and its windows clouded with grime. A flickering bulb hung over the entrance, and the shadows danced unnaturally, making her uneasy. However, she was running on empty and desperately needed gas. She stepped out, the gravel crunching underfoot, and walked to the nearest pump. "Hello?" Sarah called out, her voice echoing in the still air. There was no response. She glanced around. The station was empty, save for a pair of old rusted gas pumps and a dilapidated storefront that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. "Anyone here?" She tried again, slightly louder this time, her unease growing. Just then a door creaked open, and a man emerged from the shadows. He looked to be in his 60s, his weathered face lit only by the flickering light, giving him a spectral appearance. A worn cap sat atop his head, and his eyes bore the weight of many unspoken stories. "Need some help, miss?" His voice was raspy, laced with something that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "Yes, please, I need gas," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The man smiled, but there was something unsettling about the way his lips twisted. "Fill her up, and I'll get you inside for a nice cup of coffee," he said, motioning towards the door behind him. She hesitated. The place felt wrong, like an old horror movie where the unsuspecting traveler walks into a trap. Yet the gas gauge reminded her that she had little choice. "Okay," she said finally, willing to put aside her intuition for practicality. As he pumped the gas, Sarah felt her heart pounding in her chest. The atmosphere seemed to thicken, the shadows wrapping around her like fog. She glanced around. The surroundings felt strangely distorted, and the air was soaked with an unsettling silence. It was as if time had come to a standstill. Once the tank was full, the attendant turned, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You can head inside now, miss. Coffee's on me," he offered, his voice drawing her in against her better judgment. "Thanks," Sarah replied, reluctantly following him toward the store. The interior was dimly lit, the shelves cluttered with outdated snacks and decaying magazines that seemed frozen in time. The atmosphere was stifling, heavy with the scent of must and something she couldn't quite place. He poured her a cup of black coffee, offering it with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You know, it's been a long time since we've had someone stop by this late," he said, leaning on the counter. The way he spoke was almost conspiratorial, sending shivers coursing through her. "Oh, really? I didn't realize," Sarah replied, trying to keep the conversation light, unsure why she felt so uneasy. The hairs on her arms stood up as she glanced toward the back of the store, where the shadows seemed to swirl with a life of their own. "People don't pass this way much anymore," he continued, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. "Too busy with their lives, I suppose. But the night has a way of bringing people back, to remind them of what's really out there." There was a weight to his words that made her uneasy. "What do you mean?" she asked, her instinct urging her to bolt. "The night, miss," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It's alive, and it remembers. This place holds stories, secrets that aren't meant to be forgotten." Before she could respond, the lights above flickered violently, plunging the room into darkness for a heartbeat. When the lights returned, she noticed something. Shadows were moving in the corners of her vision like dark specters whispering secrets only they could hear. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "I should get going," she said, forcing a smile as she backed away toward the door. "I really appreciate the coffee, but it's getting late." The man's demeanor changed. His smile faded, replaced by an intense gaze that bore into her. "Are you sure you want to leave? The roads can be dangerous at this hour. Besides, you wouldn't want to leave without hearing the stories, would you?" Sarah felt a sense of urgency, her instincts screaming that she needed to escape. "Thanks for the offer, but I really should be going," she insisted, moving towards the exit. "Very well," he relented, his voice darkening. "But sometimes the night chooses its travelers, you know. Be careful, miss." The way he said that chilled her to the core. As she rushed to her car, heart racing, she felt the shadows closing in around her once more. The moment she slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors, she felt a jolt of fear as she saw something in the rearview mirror, the dark figure of a woman standing just outside the station, her face obscured by shadow. Sarah's breath quickened as she started the engine, her instincts screaming ominously. The station's neon sign buzzed erratically as Sarah tore away from the gravel lot, the tires kicking up dirt and stones behind her. She glanced in the mirror. The man stood at the entrance, arms crossed, watching her with that same unnerving smile. As she drove faster into the night, the darkness seemed to close around her, the shadows whispering warnings. Still, she pressed on, hoping to escape. But the highway felt endless, twisting and turning as if it had no beginning or end. Minutes turned into hours, and the fear crept back, gnawing at her resolve. She should have taken the man's warnings seriously. The road stretched out before her, cloaked in darkness, making her feel small and vulnerable. Just when she thought she'd left it all behind, a thick fog enveloped the road, swallowing her whole. In her rearview mirror, she saw ghostly figures flickering in and out of existence, faces twisted in silent screams. Frantically, she tried to shake the image off, gripping the steering wheel tightly as panic began to overwhelm her. "Get out of my head," she shouted at the empty road. But the darkness only seemed to deepen. Then, in the fog, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The headlights of an old car approaching, but it was moving too fast, way too fast, as if it were out of control. She swerved to avoid it, pulling onto another road, but the figure seemed to chase her. Desperate, she glanced down at her gas gauge. It was dipping dangerously low again. How long had she been driving? The fear pulsed through her veins, and she fought to keep the car steady as shadows darted out from the side of the road, reaching for her. Suddenly, the car's engine sputtered, and before she could react, it died, the car coasting to a stop on the side of the desolate road. Heart racing, Sarah turned the key in the ignition repeatedly, but nothing happened. Panic set in, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She was completely alone, stranded in the oppressive darkness. "Help!" she screamed, hoping against hope someone would hear her. But the only answer was the echo of her voice, swallowed by the night. The fog thickened around her, closing in like a vice, and all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then, like a nightmare come to life, figures began to emerge from the fog, specters with hollow eyes and twisted mouths, drawing closer with every moment. Panic clawed at her chest as she threw open the door and bolted into the night. The shadows surrounded her, whispering, taunting her as she ran through the fog. "You shouldn't have left. You should have listened." Their voices twisted around her, and she stumbled, falling to the ground, the cold earth pressing against her cheek. Just as she thought she was done for, a dim light pierced through the fog, flickering in the distance. It looked like another gas station, the familiar shape of a sign emerging. But there was something off about it. The letters were jumbled, unreadable in the gloom. Desperation fueled her as she scrambled to her feet, racing towards the light. The closer she got, the more she realized that this was no ordinary station. The windows were dark, and shadows moved inside, echoing the chilling whispers that clawed at her sanity. But fear fueled her legs, and she burst through the door, stumbling into the dim interior. "Help me!" she cried, her voice hoarse and fear-filled. But the interior was empty, the air heavy with despair and decay. The lights flickered, and the shadows seemed to pulse, whispering her name as she frantically searched for an exit. Then she felt it, the sensation of being watched, 1,000 eyes on her, all hidden in the darkness of the station. Turning quickly, Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as she found herself face to face with the old attendant. "You shouldn't have come back," he whispered, stepping out from the dark corner. His eyes glinted with malice, and the shadows around him twisted into grotesque forms, beckoning her closer. "You're part of the story now, forever." "No, I'm not," Sarah screamed, racing for the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang before she could reach it. Panic surged as she turned back, but the figures coalesced around her, their faces twisted with agony, their hands reaching out, grasping for her. "You can't escape the night," the attendant breathed, his smile widening until it seemed to split his face in two. "You belong to Hallow's End now." With nowhere to run, Sarah felt the shadows close in. The last thing she heard was the whispers crescendoing into a cacophony, weaving the tale of the lost souls bound to the darkness, destined to become part of the curse that bound Hallow's End station to the night, forever wandering in search of the unwary traveler daring enough to stop by in their time of need. And just like that, the station settled back into its stillness, the neon light flickering softly in the emptiness, waiting for the next soul to wander into its grasp, to hear the stories that should never be told,